Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam wa Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We come to our conclusion of the Families in the Quran series, and this is our last Faith Circle before Ramadan, and then in Ramadan we're going to have a particular Faith Circle program, inshallah ta'ala, throughout the week and iftar, and we're going to come to that at the end of the class. For this week, we've combined the two topics, toxic households and sibling rivalries, because they have very similar themes across. The main stories in the Quran, so whenever we talk about a concept, in this case the concept is family conflict, dysfunctional families, sometimes toxic families, abuse, domestic abuse, all these different things. We're going to discuss that in detail, inshallah ta'ala. But as has been our tradition, we start off with stories in the Quran that actually highlight these realities that actually happen in the family. So we're going to go through the story of, when it comes to the issue of an abusive parent, although of course Fir'aun was not the parent of Musa alayhi salam, but Musa alayhi salam grew up in his household and would have witnessed his oppression and abuse and violence. We also know as well, we're not going to talk about that story, but for your own reading, Ibrahim alayhi salam's father was an abusive father as well, and threatened to stone him if he didn't stop what he was doing, which is what led him to actually leave. He literally kicked him out of the house. We're going to talk as well about sibling rivalries. And when it comes to sibling rivalries, which story do you think we're going to be speaking about? Yusuf alayhi salam is one, but we kind of already touched on his story. Yeah, very good. Qabil and Habil, or Cain and Abel. And of course, Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers. These are the two salient sibling rivalries in the Quran, but we'll focus for our purposes on Qabil and Habil, because it's a story that's often not reflected upon actually. There's a lot of stuff you can find about Yusuf alayhi salam and his story, and the story with the brothers. Then we're going to talk about a third story, which is the story of domestic violence. And that is again coming back to Fir'aun and one of the greatest women to ever walk this earth, which is Asiya alayhi salam. And we know of course the abuse that she undertook with Fir'aun as her husband. After going through these stories, then we're going, and actually after each story, we're actually going to cover a few issues pertaining to that particular dynamic. Has it been posted on the WhatsApp group, the notes? Yeah. So if you go on the WhatsApp group, you'll find the notes that we've prepared. And you can go on that and follow along, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the whole concept of ulul arham, joining the ties of kinship, silatul rahim, and qat'ar rahim, cutting off ties of kinship. We're going to talk about the fiqh of that. Who are the ulul arham that you are mandated to be good to and to join? What does it mean to connect and to join the ties of kinship? Like, what is your actual obligation? What do you actually have to do to stay in the green? And what is considered cutting someone off? And are there any circumstances that may permit something like that? And then the last thing we're going to go through is general principles about conflict resolution and how we as Muslims can help navigate, deal through the family dramas, the conflicts, the issues that we might have, not just necessarily within families, but it could be friends, it could be communities, it could be workplace, whatever it may be. These are very universal principles. There's a last section we're not going to actually cover, unless there's time. I don't really think there will be. And that's the section on forgiving other people. How do we actually bring forgiveness in the heart? It's easy to say it with the tongue, I want to forgive this person, just forget, but it keeps nagging, it keeps eating up at our hearts, it keeps resurfacing those raw emotions. How do I forgive and how do I move on? And so that section there is prepared for you, for your own reading. It comes from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah in Madarij al-Salikin, in the station, the manzila of khuluq, of good character, he goes through 11 ways in which a person should respond to the dhulm of another person and how they can actually forgive. And so that's for your benefit, inshallah ta'ala. If we have time, we can go through it briefly. Before beginning, I want to preface our discussion with a very important concept in our minds. The same vices, problems, and diseases that we complain about on the political level, where we talk about the oppression of dictators, the oppression of apartheid regimes, the oppression of Israel, civil war, genocide, all these different political realities that we rightfully condemn and we rightfully are sickened by, realize that politics can be reduced to human relationships. At the end of the day, underneath each state actor are human beings that are deciding to act in different ways, and their decisions are influenced by their nafs, by the shaitan, by their personality, by personality dynamics between different individuals. We often like to think like politics is this magic box, has nothing to do with human beings, that once you get into this box, then you become evil and corrupt and tyrannical. But if you're not in that box, then you're safe from that level of dhulm. But realize that the manifestation of oppression on a political level can actually have correlates at a lower level of human organization. So from politics to maybe communities, workplaces, families, any place where human beings organize amongst each other, you will find the same dynamics at play. And the dhulm that is obviously perpetrated at the political level is at such a scale because that is the amount of quantity of human beings we're talking about. The stakes are much higher because of the quantity. But the quality actually, you will see, is the same across all levels of organization, from the top all the way to the bottom. So for example, a very common political situation is when a government decides to favor one group over another. Favor the majority group maybe, or a particular class, a particular ethnicity. There are many different political realities that manifest these tensions that then exist when the government clearly favors one ethnicity, class, people over another. And maybe some countries are coming to mind, we won't go into that. But realize, let's go now down to the most micro level of human organization, which is family. Now, who is the authority in a family? Just the mother, huh? This is just the mother. The parents, right? The parents. Does sibling favoritism exist in families?
Yes.
Okay. Ihsan, I don't know. That was a resounding yes. Right next to the father too. Wow, okay. You want to talk about that? What happens when you get sibling favoritism? You get conflict. You get tension. Don't you? You get a situation where one party or one sibling feels entitled, the other one feels oppressed and resentful. That same political reality we spoke about, that people will go against and say these dictators and they did this and this oppression, that oppression might be happening closer than you think. And perhaps you might even be the perpetrator of the very thing you advocate against on the political level. You are actually perpetrating within your own family. It is possible to be a jabbar, a tyrant, even though you don't lead a nation. It's possible that, we talk about dictators, state control, authoritarian regimes, occupation. surveillance. Are these not things that can happen within the family as well? Are these not things that an authority can abuse their authority? And I'm not talking just about parents. We're talking about older siblings. Sometimes in particular cultures, the oldest sibling is like almost like a monarchy. It's like the king has given its powers to the oldest son. And the oldest son is like now become the tribal chieftain, decides everything, even to the point of inheritance. When the parents go, the oldest son, not the Sharia, the oldest son is the one that has the authority. Does that not sound familiar when we talk about in Muslim countries where certain authorities seem to bypass the Sharia and we get upset about that? And we say, oh, why aren't they following Islam? So you see how these things that we advocate against, that we feel very strongly about on a political level, realize they're just human beings. It's human dynamics. And the same thing that manifests there can manifest as a microcosm in your own family. There can be rebellions within families. There can be revolutions started within extended families. Someone not happy with the status quo, they decide to go unhinged. At that family dinner or at that Eid gathering, they decide to just let everybody know how they're feeling inside, why what they're doing is wrong, and create a huge stir and create a huge fitna. Then people then start to argue, should you have done that? Was that the right place and time? No, they're right, but the way they did that was wrong. You can have an October 7th within your own family. And the complexities that all arise from all of that. I want us to really realize that. Because as we advocate, which we should, we can be in a situation where na'udhu billah min dhalik, and we seek Allah's protection in that we speak out, but inside we are doing the exact same, we're guilty of the exact same crimes. The only difference is that we don't have access to that level of authority for that quality that exists within us, which is the selfishness, which is the ego that craves, the shuh. We don't have that level of authority to actually cause damage at that scale. So it's only witnessed at that small scale. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the hearts. And in your circumstance, just because your evil was saved and protected from the people by Allah, by Him putting you or another person in a position where they're not able to actually, the consequences are able to come out, doesn't mean that you won't be taken into account accordingly for the state of your heart. So with that concept in mind, we start with our first story, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and that is the story of, the section is called Toxic Households and Fear. Toxic households and fear. And this story is the story of Fir'aun and Musa alayhi salam. We're not going to do a narrative telling of the story of Fir'aun and Musa. If you're interested, you can obviously do some further reading. But rather, we're going to do a bit of a thematic exploration. And ask the question why. You find out of all the prophets that are mentioned in the Quran, the theme of khawf, fear, features very heavily in the story of Musa alayhi salam. Fear. You will see Musa alayhi salam admit to his fear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling him not to fear, and you will see this throughout the story of Musa alayhi salam until he eventually is saved by Allah and saved from Fir'aun. Now, before we explore that, I want us to ask that question of why. Perhaps one of the connections is the household that he grew up in. You see, and we're going to come to this after we see this, when it comes to fear and anxiety, this is a lot of the times linked to early childhood experiences and the way in which they saw the authority in their world as children growing up acted towards them. If they were very authoritarian, if they were controlling, if they were abusive, that will create an internalized sense of fear, because the place that was meant to be your protection is actually the place of threat and danger. And so a person then lives with this fear and anxiety because of this abusive household. So when you look at the verses that are there, you will see highlights of Musa alayhi salam being afraid in multiple instances. The first instance here is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks him to throw the stick down and it turns into a snake. وَلَّا مُدَبِرًا وَلَمْ يُعَقِّبْ. He ran away in the other direction and he didn't even turn back. Like there was no curiosity. He just ran out of the way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَا تَخَفْ. Do not be afraid. إِنِّي لَا يَخَافُ لَدَيَّ الْمُرْسَلُونَ. Certainly, the messengers do not fear when they're in my presence. Now, pause here. A very important gem for us to take from this statement. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't fear, إِنِّي لَا يَخَافُ لَدَيَّ الْمُرْسَلُونَ. The first one was a command, was an amr. This one is a khabar. The first one was a command, and the second one was now a description, saying, don't fear. How can you get out of your fear? And now I'm speaking to everybody here. This verse is now applying to you. لَا تَخَفْ. Don't be afraid. Whatever it may be that you're afraid of, whatever it may be that's causing you anxiety, how do you quell it? How do you quell it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in my presence the messengers don't fear. So if you can use your iman resources in a situation to bring into your awareness the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is with you, that Allah is watching you, that Allah is looking at you. As-Sahl ibn Abdullah al-Tustari, he mentions this, and Ibn Qudama records this in Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, that his shaykh, his teacher, taught him when he was very young, that say to yourself these three things: Allah is with me, Allah is watching me, Allah is looking at me. And let the consequences of those three realities then sink into your hearts. That is a heart in which the fear and the anxiety will start to vanquish, and the heart now becomes filled with what's called muraqabah. This is a spiritual maqam called muraqabah, which is an intense an acute awareness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over you. That muraqabah has many gems. Of them is to be fearless, because you know Allah is with you, Allah is watching you, and Allah is looking at you. If you look at the next verse, again Musa alayhi salam describes his fear. Rabbi inni akhafu an yukadhibun. I'm afraid that they're going to reject me. وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. And I did that deed there, obviously, the accidental murder, and he's afraid that they're going to kill him. What does Allah say in response? قَالَ لَا تَخَافَا. You both don't be afraid. That's Harun he's speaking to as well, Musa and Harun. Then what does Allah say? Again a command, then khabar. إِنَّنِي مَعَكُمَا أَسْمَعُ وَأَرَى. I am with you both. I am hearing and I am seeing. Again, Allah links the command not to be afraid to the ma'iyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is with you, He is hearing and He is seeing. And then you see, فَفَرَرْتُ مِنْكُمْ لَمَّا خِفْتُكُمْ. This is now Musa alayhi salam. Who's he speaking to here? فَفَرَرْتُ مِنْكُمْ لَمَّا خِفْتُكُمْ. So I fled from you when I feared you. فَوَهَبَ لِي رَبِّي حُكْمًا. Then my Lord granted me wisdom, وَجَعَلَنِي مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, and made me of the prophets, or of the messengers. He's speaking straight to Fir'aun here. He's speaking, but what is the key word there? لَمَّا خِفْتُكُمْ. When I was afraid of you. Again, fear. Do you see how it keeps coming up? Now this is Musa alayhi salam speaking to this figure that, as I said, was the authority in the household that he grew up in. He obviously wasn't his father in any stretch of the imagination. But what he's doing here, he's breaking free from an abusive, maladaptive relationship that he did have, of course, with Fir'aun. One of the things, when a child is growing up, their parents actually become obscured with their God image when they're very young. What do I mean by that? Obviously, I'm not saying that they think their parents are God. What I'm saying is that the child and the baby, who and where does he think all nourishment comes from? Now you can say the mother. The mother. Who and where does he think the protection lies? Mother and father.
Everything that is rububiyyah, the sifat rububiyyah, the lordship of Allah, the baby and the child as they grow up sees the parents in that light. As a person grows up, there needs to be that separation between the God image and their parent. And some people have a bit of a overlap, not in a shirky way like that they actually think that their parents are God, but in a psychological way, from a psychological dependence way. That of course their parents, as they're young and growing up, even as children and even as young adolescents, their parents are their rocks. Take care of everything. Now the moment that the child or the teenager or the young adult witnesses the susceptibility or the weakness or the compromise of the parent is when that separation starts to occur, where they realize that the parent is not this Superman that they thought they once were. And that separation is actually healthy because it leads to a sense of independence. Sometimes that separation never happens, and that's when you get this codependency and complete dependency, psychological dependency, sometimes for life. But that separation is something that's very important. And sometimes it's something that happens as a result of the fact that the parent never was the source of strength and dependency at all. And obviously that's the case with Musa alayhi salam. And so he is now speaking against Fir'aun. And then as you can see, some other verses there that speak to the fear. Musa alayhi salam is talking about فَأَوْجَسَ فِي نَفْسِهِ خِيفَةً Musa. Allah says, what is this verse talking about? And he sensed within himself fear. And Allah said, لَا تَخَفْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْأَعْلَى. Don't be afraid, you will have the upper hand. When is this taking place? It's during his duel with the magicians. The duel with the magicians. Then it comes to the point where he comes to the sea, and here actually, which is the most fearful part of the story, where literally they see the sea in front of them and behind them is this army. That is the one place where there's no mention of fear. Because Musa alayhi salam's transformation is complete here. His tarbiyah, the experiences that he went through, the difficult experiences that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in stages put him through, adversity after adversity, trial after trial, until he was at a point where people were afraid around him, and he showed that unrelenting optimism in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, Kalla inna ma'ya rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord is with me. Remember, Allah is emphasizing, Inni ma'akuma, I'm with you all. Now Musa alayhi salam has internalized that. And now in the most difficult moment of his life, he says, Inna ma'ya rabbi sayahdeen. Allah is with me, He will guide me. Now, you see the theme of fear as we've talked about there in Musa alayhi salam. I want to turn to the literature in regards to child development psychology and its link to parental styles. So if you go to I don't know what page number it is on your PDF, but after the story there, you will see parental styles and child development. There are 4 parental styles that this study looked at. And this study was actually based in Indonesia, so these are, by and large, would be mostly Muslim families. And what they did was they correlated parental styles with trait neuroticism. What is trait neuroticism? Neuroticism is that trait that makes people more irritable, fearful, prone to negative emotion, anxiety, worry, blowouts, that sort of thing. And so what they found was there was a connection between one of the types of parenting styles. So the parenting styles have 2 dimensions, a level of care and warmth and a level of protection. So there's overprotectiveness and high care, and then there's no protection at all, no control, and no care at all, and then there's everything in between. And so you have those 4 different parenting styles there. I won't go into them. It's in the notes for your benefit. But what was found to be correlated with trait neuroticism significantly was affectionless control, where the focus was on control, overprotectiveness, but there wasn't much warmth there. And that led to this trait neuroticism. And there were other ones as well that did also correlate, but the highest one was affectionless control. And neglectful parenting, of course, was there as well. And they did find even an affectionate constraint, which is high level of warmth and care, but also a high level of control. They did find this to have a positive relationship with trait neuroticism. Now, this also then, based on how the parents are, it also affects the child's God image. We spoke about this. There's a very beautiful paper on Yaqeen Institute by Dr. Usman Umarji and Dr. Hassan Alwan called Spiritual Attachment Styles. And they talk about the way in which people attach to God. And they break it down into 5 different attachment styles. One of them is called the disorganized God attachment. And so basically people who are highly anxious and slightly avoidant in their relationship with God, they perceive God as strict and not very helpful, appreciative or merciful. They also have a negative self-image as well. People in this group are very fearful of Allah, but they avoid coming closer to Him. And so the parental style of affectionless control is something that's very similar to this God image. And when a parent, particularly a father, has this level of control and exertion, then this is the way in which they will see God. And this is the way in which they will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. There's a correlation as well between parental style and the way in which a person views Allah. This is su'adhan billah. This is su'adhan billah. This is a disproportionate focus on the strictness of the rules and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not in the actual love itself. Okay, we move on to the second one, which is toxic households and jealousy. So this is the story of Qabil and Habil. Qabil and Habil. Now, this story is found in Surah Al-Ma'idah, ayah 27 to 31. So in this story, it's the story of the 2 sons of Adam alayhi salam. وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ أَبْنَيْ آدَمَ بِالْحَقِّ إِذْ قَرَّبَا قُرْبَانًا فَتُقُبِّلَ مِنْ أَحَدِهِمَا وَلَمْ يُتَقَبَّلْ مِنَ الْآخَرِ. They both offered a sacrifice to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of them was accepted and the other one was not accepted. And this is where the story begins. Now, the unequal distribution is something that even at a young age, kids cannot tolerate. You'll see it. It's not fair. Why do they get this and why do I get that? Why does he get more? And the parent has to reason because they're older or because of this. They are so keenly perceptive to any sense of unequal distribution, even just from a young age. And we're wired for that for 2 reasons. Number 1, in the fitrah, the commitment to justice. But number 2, from a more darker angle, our ego and the shuh of our ego that wants and cannot tolerate if they feel like they're being slighted or they're not being acknowledged or appreciated. Now, when it comes to people, then obviously you demand your rights from people and it's not fair and that's justice and that's a good mechanism for a person to stand up for themselves. But when it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has decided it, because in the world, it is full of unequal distribution. Now that's not to say injustice, because this world is a testing ground. It's meant to be this way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that فَضَّلَ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ فِي الرِّزْقِ, that Allah has favored some of you over others in rizq. Not because the people He gave more rizq to are more beloved to Him. No, not at all. But it's a test for both of them. This world is embedded in the reality of this world is unequal distribution, is a non-meritocracy, is oppression and injustice, is poor and rich, is the oppressed and the marginalized and the elite. That is the distribution, is the power and those who are weak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He is the one who distributes all of this as a test. As a test, because in the unequal distribution is the moral test and the ethical test and the spiritual tests that come forward. If everything was equal, there's no striving for justice. There's no advocating for the weak. There's no making the difficult ethical decisions if everything's all perfect from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not the point. This is a testing ground for these things to be this way. Now, sometimes things are in that way so that you can make a change. Sometimes it's in that way for you to just be patient. That you've worked so hard, you've done whatever it may be, but it just turns out that this other person got ahead. And yes, they take their riba loans, and they do things the wrong way, and they're not coming to the masjid, and they're not praying, and they're not fasting, and you are, and you're giving in charity, and it seems like that charity is not coming back to your bank account, and you think, what's going on? What's happening here? It's a test. It's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this situation, Qabil and Habil, it's the same situation that we may find ourselves in, of any jealousy, of any comparing. His was accepted, mine was accepted. Why? Then that resentment turns into anger towards that person. Jealousy and envy towards that person. It consumes you until you start to then act aggressively. Now, when it comes to siblings and sibling rivalries, there's a lot of things based on the dynamic that can really pit siblings against each other. Perhaps one sibling feels like they do a lot more for the family than everybody else, and that's always the case. There's always a general rule anyways in all groups. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. That's like one of these rules and principles. Any group work, now think back to school, you'll think, oh yeah, you're right. 4 or 5 people in a group, 2 people do everything, right? Any organization, it's always 1, 2 people, they're doing the rest, they're doing most of it. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And in families, it's no different. There's going to be unequal distribution. And with that, is there equal composition? No. In terms of the resources that are available to the family, in terms of attention, love, care, help, aid, resources, financial resources, authority, respect. So there's that angle that often leads to sibling issues. And by the way, when it comes to family, it's estrangements and like cutting off, that usually occurs at the level of siblings. Rare, I mean, it does obviously occur within parents. That's a very sad, rare case. Most people feel that sense of obligation and duty to their parents. But most of the time it occurs in that level of siblings. It's always that uncle or that aunt or that, and it's always at that level. And as I said, there's reasons for that. Number one, as we talked about, goes back to this. I put in the effort, I put in this. Why is this person being treated in this way? Why are they just getting away with that? And they get that resentment built up. They get upset, they get angry. Also, sometimes there are some burdens that are carried from childhood and adolescence, things that were never addressed. Bullying, whatever it may be, that's just still inside there. Fresh wounds. Then adding on top of all that, the limited resources that exist with the parents. So as I said, wealth, attention, this will put siblings, because whenever you have limited resources, and there's 2 people, or 3, and there's scarce resources, what does that breed? Competition, right? There's economics. As I said, all economics, politics, it all plays a role. Don't think these are separate. It's human relations. Scarcity of resources. Limited people. Then, competition. That leads to these rivalries. Inheritance, all these sorts of things. Gifts, whatever it may be. These are all things that can pit siblings against each other. And that is why it takes iman to be able to rise above all of these things. Because when you put into the family, you're not expecting the reward in this dunya, you're expecting it in the akhirah. So in fact, you might even become happy that you're not being recognized. Because it's more reward for you then. Because if you were to be recognized, then that may be a diminishment of the reward in the next life. Number 2, the burdens from childhood, you attain to that level of forgiveness that we spoke about at the end of the notes here. Forgiveness. And that's a spiritual station. And then when it comes to inheritance and that sort of thing, we have a sharia distribution that puts an end to all the discussions and the difficulties that you see people years and years amongst the non-Muslims, they're still disputing inheritance and that. And honestly, sadly, against Muslims as well, when they choose not to go by sharia as well. And so the story goes, as we're well aware, that Qabil ends up killing Habil. And it's interesting, فَطَوَّعَتْ لَهُ نَفْسُهُ قَتْلَ أَخِيهِ. His soul permitted him to the murder of his brother. And this is the point here. The nafs inside has this resentment. And don't be confused. There's mawani' from, mawani' means barriers or preventers. From the soul doing what it really wants to do. From the nafs doing what it really wants to do, there are barriers. What are those barriers? The first line barriers are circumstances. Like, you're not going to kill someone. The first level is, like, people just laugh thinking about that. It's like there's a built-in awareness of, why would I do that? Go to jail, etc., etc. There's circumstantial, societal things there, right? That are stopping you from doing that. Then after that's gone, then there's like a fitra'i moral sense of like, no, that's wrong. I don't want to do that. And these two are shared, Muslim and non-Muslim. Then beyond that, if that goes and the strength of the resentment is breaking through these mawani', the last wall standing is taqwa. Of just fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to stop you from doing it. Now we talk about murder, that's very high level, but there's so many other things. Backbiting and slandering. You're in a gathering. You're so upset and consumed with resentment. You just got off the phone from some family conference. They said this about you and they were doing this. It's so upsetting to you. You go to dinner and it's eating you up inside. فَطَوَّعَتْ لَهُ نَفْسُهُ. Will your soul permit you now to just unleash? Because the circumstantial mawani' are gone. Why? Because it's socially not considered unacceptable for a person to start ranting and venting about their family. In certain social circles, it's even expected. So that's gone. Then there's the fitrah. I shouldn't do that and just talk bad about them without any purpose. That's the weaker thing. If it's not cultivated, it can be distorted. Now the last thing is taqwa. If that's not strong enough, boom, the floodgates go. This can be from just speech, but it could also be to action as well. Are you able to stop your soul from moving in the direction, in the nafs, moving into the direction where it's driving you? Because that resentment, which is natural sometimes, will drive you into places, dark places. You act in ways that you didn't expect. You blow up in ways you didn't think that you would before. And so that taqwa is something that is necessary there. The taqwa. To be able to prevent. And that was the case with Habil. لَإِن بَسَطْتَ إِلَيَّ يَدَكَ لِتَقْتُلِنِي مَا أَنَا بِبَاسِطٍ يَدِي إِلَيْكَ لِيَقْتُلَكَ. If you extend your hand to kill me, I will not even fight back. I will not try to kill you. That was the mawani' of his taqwa. That was the mani' of his taqwa, the barrier of his taqwa. Okay. Now we move on to the last section here, which is domestic violence and toxic households and abuse. And this is the story of Asiya alayhi salam. And there's an ayah in Surah Al-Tahrim that indicates this. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا امْرَأَةَ فِرْعَوْنَ إِذْ قَالَتْ رَبِّ ابْنِ لِي عِنْدَكَ بَيْتًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ وَنَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. So Asiya makes a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in the plea of a dua of an abused woman in an abusive relationship with a zalim, mushrik, kafir, Fir'aun husband, literally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights the dua in the plea here of Asiya. What is the dua? Rabbi, my Lord. Number one point to benefits to derive from here for people who are going through abusive relationships in any particular setting or circumstance. Number one is to understand they are not your Rabb. Your Rabb is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rabbuna ar-Rahman. Rabbi, my Rabb, my master. They may think that they are. They may act as if they are. They may be trying to exert control over you, but no one can exert control over you except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rabbi. Then she says, Ibni li indaka baytan fil jannah. The thought is now away from this dunya where she doesn't necessarily see a way out at this moment, so she's thinking about the akhirah. And that is what fuels her sabr to move on and to continue on, is the akhirah. And she's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to build a palace in Jannah near Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. So the first lesson here is that the psychological resilience that is necessary in these relationships is derived from two things. Iman bil rububiyyah, which is Iman in Allah's rububiyyah, His Lordship. And number two, Iman bil akhirah, Iman in the akhirah, in the hereafter. These are the two sources that a person derives that psychological reserve and resilience in those hardships. The second thing we get from here is وَنَجِّنِي مِن فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. You know, sometimes there is a messaging from community that you're meant to suffer in silence. That, oh, just stay in the marriage. Oh, just don't say anything. Don't say anything back. They may be abusing you. Don't say anything to your parents. Don't say anything to your brother. Don't say anything to the cousin. You know, just don't say anything. Keep it hush-hush. It's going to create fitna and discord. What is Asiya asking Allah here? وَنَجِّنِي مِن فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. Save me from Fir'aun. When you ask Allah for something, it means that you're wanting a way out. And so that's okay. وَنَجِّنِي مِن فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. And his actions, his abuse. وَنَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. And save me from this community who are ظالمين, an oppressive community. And we know those who are complicit in oppression are oppressors themselves. The Prophet ﷺ told us this when he walked by a grave and he saw that they were being flogged. And he said this one is one of the reasons is he used to walk by a person being oppressed and he would say nothing. That's why he was being punished. So complicity is a form of oppression. And so you can be in a family that enables oppression. Why? You know something's going on, but you know if you say something, it's not going to look good. Or if you say something, then it's going to create a family rift. This is complicity. Then if you know the abuse is serious, you might not be the one doing it, but you might be min al-qawm al-zalimin, as Asiya is saying here, from the community that are all zalim. They're all either enablers or complicit. And so we have to be afraid of this from the family point of view, but also from a community point of view. Us as a community, in the institutions that we have, the masajid that we run, the organizations that we run, are these organizations and masajid safe havens and places where a person who's going through difficulty and abuse can safely come and feel comfortable to be able to divulge, and that they're not going to be told just go there and enable the ongoing abuses. Very, very difficult thing. It sounds very easy to say on the tongue, very difficult thing. Then someone comes, oh, do you have proof, brother? How do you know? If you say this, what's going to happen? Is it really that bad? You don't know 100%. Let's not talk about this. It becomes a big fitna. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from this. And my advice is, if something like this comes to attention, don't dismiss. Seek advice from others. Seek advice from others. Because as I said, individual solitary, there will be 8, 10, 12, a dozen, 70 excuses that will come to the mind why you shouldn't get involved. But if you ask other people, sometimes those excuses start to shrink. And you might find yourself in a position where you need to be the answer to this dua. This dua of Asiya alayhi salam is calling out for that plea. Najjini min Fir'aun wa amali. There may be many other sisters or brothers who are making the same plea to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us by putting us in a place where we're made aware and we have a choice. Will we be from min al-qawm al-zalimin? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. Ameen. Now, those are the three stories I wanted to go through regarding the issues of difficulties and toxicity within families. Because of course, families, as we've spoken about before, are meant to be incubators of love and rahmah, are meant to be anchors of support, are meant to be places of joy and happiness where people can come together and share food, discuss, lean on each other. That is the whole wisdom and hikmah behind families. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in families, and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasized the idea of family obligations. So, we return to this hadith that we actually started with, this hadith at the beginning of the series. And this hadith is found in the Musnad of Al-Bazzar. Al-Bazzar died 292 after the Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ said, verily, inna lirrahim hujnatan mutamassikatan bil arsh. That the womb has a hook that is attached to the arsh. Subhanallah. The womb, and this is Allah's creation, and this is like the womb, meaning all of our family relations is embodied in this image here from this hadith. بِلِسَانٍ ذَلِقٍ, with a penetrating tongue. Allahumma sil man wasalani waqta' man qata'ani. Look at this imagery. What is this womb saying? Hanging from the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Connect with those who connect my relations with me, and sever relations with those who sever the relations with me. فيقول الله تبارك وتعالى, so this is the hadith Qudsi, أنا الرحمن الرحيم, I am Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, وإني شققت الرحم من اسمي, and I am Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, and I have derived the womb from my name. Meaning Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the womb and the concept of families, the reason that they're there is because Allah is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, and so the effect of His names and attributes, the athar of His names and attributes are found all throughout creation, by the way. So the effect of Allah's beauty, His Jamal, is found in creation, is it not? How many beautiful things you see in nature. That's the effect, the athar of His Jamal, His attribute of Jamal, His beauty. The athar of His quwwah, His power, is seen when you look at the power of the ocean, when you look at the power of these storms and cyclones, when you look at the power of these natural disasters. It's the quwwah, that's the athar, that's there. What is the athar, the effect or the impact of Allah being Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim? It's in the family. The fact that there are families, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala don't want us to be alone, but embedded us within a network of families with natural love that's built in within our fitrah towards each other. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Inni shaqaqtu rahim min ismi, I have derived this rahim, you, from my name. فَمَنْ وَصَلَهَا وَصَلْتُهُ وَمَنْ بَتَكَهَا بَتَكْتُهُ. So whoever connects with you, then I will connect with them, and whoever cuts off relations with you, then I will cut off relations with them. And so this very clear, explicit hadith shows us the importance of maintaining family ties. Silatul Rahim. Now, Al-Qurtubi actually records ijma' in his tafsir of famous ayah, the first ayah of Surah An-Nisa, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. He actually records ijma'. He says, by agreement in the religion, Silatul Rahim, joining the ties of kinship, is wajib, is obligatory. So no difference of opinion there. And cutting them off is haram. And many of the scholars say it's a major sin because of the level of imagery and of course the level of emphasis that's been placed here. So now this gives us a very important question to ask. Who are the arham? Because we have an obligation to them. And if we don't fulfill that obligation, it's actually a major sin. And so we need to know who are the arham. Who are the ones that we owe it to do this? And so this is a question that comes to us, and you find it answered amongst the fuqaha as well. So we'll go into a little bit of fiqh, inshallah ta'ala. So the first rahim, by the way, the first rahim, you can say, the widest rahim is rahim insaniya, is the womb of humanity. We all come from Adam and Eve, don't we? So we're all related to each other. That is the furthest womb, the most expansive womb that connects all of us. The womb of Hawa, our mother. That connects every single person in this room, Muslim, non-Muslim. And so for them, that is mustahab. That's obviously not a wajib, that's mustahab, otherwise that'd be insane. That is mustahab. Some of the scholars, they make the exception for those who are muhadda lillahi wa rasul, those who express animosity and enmity and aggressiveness towards Allah and His Messenger. So the enemies who try to destroy Islam, etc., etc. Then in this case, then this is not obviously something that is due in terms of kindness. Having said that, even still some, like Al-Qurtubi and others, will say, no, you still show them kindness, although you might need to obviously act in kind with them, particularly during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They went to battle with them, but they still said general kindness even in that scenario. Then there's the Rahim. Then there's the Rahim al-Islamiyya as well, which is obviously the womb of Islam, which is all believers, and that takes precedence. That supersedes. If there's ever a conflict, this precedence of Islam always goes ahead here because the bond of faith is thicker than blood. If there's a conflict. Then there's the rahim khassa, the specific rahim which we're talking about here, about silat al-rahim, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran and also the Prophet ﷺ in the ahadith that we have available to us emphasizes and commands the maintaining of these ties. So who are those family members that this is due for? So there's two main positions as to who are the family that you need to engage in silat al-rahim. The first one is all the maharim, all of your mahrams. So every person that is forbidden for you to marry, then that circle of your mahram, those are the family members. Now, is this inclusive of your whole family, or is this a bit exclusive? It's exclusive, isn't it, right? Who is it not? It's not including your cousins, right? Your first cousins, your second cousins. It's not including those who are not your mahram. And so the second position is wider. It is the aqarib, all of your blood relatives. So the position of the Maliki Shafi'is and the Hanbalis are the aqarib, the blood relatives, basically including your cousins. Now how far? Second cousin, third cousin, fourth cousin, fifth cousin, sixth cousin, they don't specify. They don't specify. Some of the Hanafis, and a minor position from the Malikis, and Abu al-Khattab, who was a Hanbali himself, they said that it is just the maharim, those who are mahram to you. But certainly the majority position is that it includes your blood relatives as well. How about non-Muslim family? For non-Muslim family, they say that for your maqarib and extended family and your maharim, then it's mustahab. It downgrades from wajib to mustahab. But for your parents, it still maintains the wujub, that it's obligatory for your parents, even if they are not Muslim. Now, we understand that the family, if we take the wider position, which includes basically all of your blood relatives, when it comes to the duty, if we take that in mind, then what does it mean? What does Silat al-Rahim actually mean? So, the first thing to note is Sila, joining the ties of kinship, does not mean mukafa'a. Mukafa'a is reciprocity. Meaning if someone treats you good, then you return them back. You visit them because they visited you. You give them gifts because they gave you gifts. This is mukafa'a. This is not sila. That's the first point to note. So that sila includes those who do not actually extend the same level of relationship that you do. They don't visit you. They haven't visited you in like 5-6 years to your house, but you visit them. They haven't given you a gift in who knows how long, but you'll give them gifts every Eid. This is sila. This is not mukafa'a. So what are the activities that are involved when it comes to silat al-rahim? So the scholars, they mention a few things. Visitation is one of the main things. Visitation. Now, visitation, in terms of the frequency of visitation, it's not been specified by the Sharia. It hasn't been specified by the Prophet ﷺ. And so, whatever is not specified by the Sharia, then there's a principle in fiqh. If it's not specified by the Sharia, then what specifies it? Sorry? Sorry? Urf, very good. The urf, al-ada, muhakkama, is a qa'ida al-fiqh. And so, whatever is not specified by the Sharia, it becomes specified by whatever is customary. And so basically the frequency is whatever is the custom within a particular culture. Whatever the expectation is, whatever that general urf is when it comes to visitation. Fulfilling needs, helping them. The scholars even specify, particularly the Hanafis, the Malikis and the Shafi'is. By the way, the Hanbalis are the most lax when it comes to this because they were the most broad in their definition of rahim. So they're the most relaxed when it comes to what the actual obligation is. But the Hanafis and Malikis and Shafi'is include writing letters if they're absent. So this would then extend to like FaceTime, WhatsApp messages, WhatsApp groups. They say this suffices for all of the relatives who are not present, except for the parents. If they ask for your presence, then you have to go. If they ask for the presence, then you have to go. But for the other relatives, if they're far and they ask for your presence, then technically you don't. You can just send a gift, you can send a letter, you can send a WhatsApp message. Now obviously there's obligation. Obviously mustahab, it's better obviously to go. Spending on poor relatives. This is also from Silatul Rahim as well. The Hanafis and the Shafi'is, they say that visiting poor relatives without spending on them, if you're able to, that does not suffice as Silatul Rahim then. Now, the Hanbalis say, spend on those you would inherit from if they are in need. Meaning not necessarily everyone that you need to spend on, but particularly those that you would inherit from. So if someone dies and you were going to inherit from them, then and they're poor and they're in need and you're able to, then those are the people that you must give to. The Malikis are the most narrow when it comes to spending. They say you only need to spend, like wajib, on parents and children. That's it. By the way, what does this mean implication-wise? If it's an obligation for you to spend, then that's not zakatable. So for the Malikis, you obviously, and this is for everyone, all by agreement, you cannot give zakat to your parents or your children, even if they're needy. That's an obligation that you have. That's a separate obligation. But according to the Malikis, any other family member in need, then that would be zakat. But according to the other madahib, because they've extended it, like the Hanafis and Shafi'is, where they say all of your relatives who are in need, then you can't give zakat to your relatives then. And in the Hanabila, those who inherit, then do you understand how it goes in that way? So the zakat cannot be given if the obligation is there. The easiest is what Imam Ahmad said, what is Silatul Rahim? Lutf was salam. Greetings and being kind and gentle. So you visit with whatever is the urf in regards to the family members that are present in your locale, those who are not in your locale, and some of them specify like the same shurut of Jum'ah, if you're not meant to, like if the distance is such that you wouldn't even be obligated to pray Jum'ah, meaning traveling, then that would be meaning you don't have to go out of your way to then visit per se from a wajib point of view, except for the parents if they demand it, of course, except for the parents if they demand it. But other than that, so that's the visitation. Other than that, it's just lutf wa salam. And, you know, obviously if they ask for something and whatnot, technically, like if you're not able to, it's there. But that's the Hanbalis are the most wider in this regard. Lutf wa salam. And just helping them when they need help in that regard. Now, keep in mind, Hakim ibn Hizam, he reports, a man asked the Prophet ﷺ, what act of charity is the best? The Prophet ﷺ said, one given to an estranged relative. And now this is a time in Ramadan coming up in Eid where you can give your best charity. There's always that person you haven't spoken to in a while. And the charity can be not just financial charity, a physical gift, but it can be emotional gifts by your time, your attention, a call, putting yourself out there, making yourself vulnerable. And that is the best. As in this case, the Prophet ﷺ said, obviously, the fadail a'mal is a different point. The Prophet ﷺ will say this is the best, in a different instance say this is the best. And so there's a whole discussion about that. Perhaps the Prophet ﷺ knew for each person as an individual, this person coming. For you, he knew that they may have had a strange relative. So he said, for you, this is the best for you. And for another person, he would say that this is the best, etc., etc. Okay. Now, we understand now the obligation of Silatul Rahim. Basically, if we bring it back to, it's visitation within reason for those who are in your locale, and anytime you interact with them, salam and gentleness, and if they need any help, then you're there to help them. And then of course, when it comes to financial, the bare bones, of course, parents and child, absolute by agreement, obligation. If you're able to, you must give for their aid. And in some of the other scholars will include anybody that you inherit from. You must give them if they're in need. And then some even say, any of your blood relatives, if they're in need, then you must give and ensure that they are taken care of. Now, what does cutting off ties mean? What does qata' al-rahim mean? Have I cut off ties with this person? Ibn Hajar al-Haythami, he gives two opinions. The first opinion is causing harm to your relative, then just causing harm to the relative, that is a form of qata' al-rahim. You've caused harm to the relative, you've actually severed ties in that regard. Even though it obviously abandoning them completely, that's like goes without being said. Obviously, that's what cutting off ties mean. But even just causing harm to a family member, that is cutting off, that is severing a tie. When you're causing harm in any way, financial harm, emotional harm, physical harm, psychological harm, whatever it may be. Second position is, it extends to the abandonment of showing kindness. So that is when a person discontinues a custom of good treatment that that relative was used to receiving from them without a valid Shari'i excuse. This would also constitute severing ties of kinship as well. That, there is an expectation or an understanding customarily of a call every Eid or whatever it may be, and then you don't do this anymore, or you stop doing this, then this would be considered a form of qat' al-rahim as well. And obviously, abandoning them, not talking to them for more than 3 days, not ever out of anger. Like there's a conflict, and you guys are upset at each other, and more than 3 days, now this has gone into the aspect of cutting the person off. Okay, we understand silat al-rahim, we understand qat' al-rahim. Now, are there any legitimate excuses for not visiting someone? Is there a situation where, so we're not saying cut the person off actually, we're saying particularly the idea of visitation, which is a component of silat al-rahim. Because you cannot visit someone but you haven't technically cut them off. What are the valid Shari'i reasons? Number one, harm that occurs during visits. Now, we need to be very important, it needs to be important here to understand. A person has to make their own ijtihad here. The harm cannot be like they smell funny, they say weird jokes, they just give me a weird vibe. Like this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about actual, tangible, physical harm, emotional abuse, like you come in and they literally abuse you, they insult you, they make you cry. Like we're talking about a real, and it's consistent. It's not like a one-off, like you had a bad visit one time. Like this is a consistent thing based on the person has a personality disorder, whatever it may be, and this is the way to treat. This is what we're talking about. And at the end of the day, there's no faqih or mufti that's going to give you a verdict. It's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is going to judge you whether or not you were just trying to get out of that annoying Eid dinner, or whether there was actually true, genuine harm that you were saving yourself from. Now obviously it's the extreme version, physical harm, abuse, sexual abuse and these sorts of things, well, of course 100% to protect ourselves from this. Then there's a spectrum, right? When it gets into then the psychological, then it gets into there's a gray area. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing how important it is to join the ties of kinship, whether or not you are willing to say, yep, I think that this is the harm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will justify for me. Second one is actually interestingly mentioned by the Malikis in particular. They said an arrogant, wealthy relative towards a poor relative, the poor relative does not have to go and visit that wealthy relative. That's very interesting. And it goes back to that principle of harm, right? That every time they visit, they're made to feel bad, lesser, and they're made to feel just low as a human being, low self-esteem. It's interesting that the Malikis mention this. By the way, Malikis, they'll always recognize actually the psychological harm more than the other madhahib. Even when it comes to issues of divorce and valid reasons for a lady to ask for khula, the Malikis are the most broad in their definition of abuse, for instance, to include these sorts of things, and they include it here as well, which is interesting. And then the third one is a less dramatic one. As I said, being a traveler's distance away, then there's not that obligation to visit. Obviously it's musta'ab to do so, but it's not an expectation. If you have to obviously go way out of your way to do it, it wouldn't be sinful that you're not doing it within a certain period of time. But those within your locale, it's just within whatever the custom is, whatever the urf is. Alrighty, we move on to conflict resolution here. So with conflict resolution, the Prophet ﷺ said, keep this in mind how important conflict resolution is. And reconciling, either yourself or helping other people. The Prophet ﷺ said, shall I not inform you of something more excellent in degree than fasting, prayer, and charity? It's a trifecta, isn't it? Fasting, prayer, 3 pillars of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, can I tell you what's better than 3 pillars of Islam? And the people said, Bala, of course. And he said, it is Islahu dhatil bayn, reconciling between 2 people. SubhanAllah. Reconciling between 2 people. And brother, causing dispute.
Brother, is this necessary right now?
Who do you think you are? Stop. You think you've been here for a couple of faith circles and you can just tell me what to do?
Yo, are you guys okay?
You're okay. He just thinks that, just because he...
Pause!
Chill.
Pause! Okay. Who wants to come and mediate?
I was going to.
Oh, you were going to, right? Okay, Bismillah. Come.
I was going to settle them both.
Okay, come on, Bismillah.
I'm not okay.
Okay, who wants to mediate? Who wants to mediate? Okay, Athar will mediate. Bismillah, stand up. Okay. Bismillah. We haven't gone into the principles yet, so let's see if we can go on blind. Alrighty. Go, please. So he said, brother, what's going on? Okay, so he's broken them apart, now he's asking.
Thinks he can just boss me around whenever he...
So Sarim's saying he thinks he can just boss me around wherever how he wants.
Well, I mean, it's necessary that there's an amir, otherwise it's just chaos.
And then Abid's saying there's necessary, there's a mirror, otherwise it's just chaos. And Athar is not doing anything, by the way, at the moment.
Can we resolve this outside later?
He said, let's resolve this outside later.
Explain, why did he go up during the talk?
He's saying, why did he just go up randomly during the talk? He said, because I can, bro. Okay, Athar has clearly failed in trying to reconcile between these two. Alhamdulillah. That was all just staged, by the way. That was all just staged. Alhamdulillah. So, just to wake us all up there. So, that was the wrong way to try and reconcile between people. Actually, every single thing that was done was wrong there, so it's really good, alhamdulillah. He did that on purpose, though. He did it on purpose. The first principle, so I put facilitators of bringing people together and barriers. The first principle is, do not delay reconciling. And what did he say? Let's talk about this later. This is an important point. Why? Because, and this is, by the way, do not delay. There is nuance here. Obviously, when people are, obviously tensed up, there's an important aspect there. But do not delay, because when people delay, that's when resentment builds in the heart. And what it was a small problem, like a small hole, like, if you get a crack in your windshield. Hamza was telling me about this when we were driving. It was very small at the time. It could have been prepared maybe a bit easier. What happens when the windshield gets a small crack? What happens if you just leave it? What happens? It gets bigger and spreads until the whole thing is cracked, right? That's the same thing with issues between people. Very small, but over time, cracks, assumptions, everything like this. And the longer that you keep it, then the harder it gets to actually reconcile. The harder it actually gets. And so squashing the beef early rather than later is a very important principle and facilitator. Number two, choosing the right setting. And he did do that right, because he was like, okay, like we're literally in the middle of class right now. Maybe we should, so he did do that right, which is the idea, maybe we can talk about this outside. Choosing the right area. In the middle of public gathering, people's tensions are going high, there may be ego, there's other family around, so choosing the right setting, that's very important. Choosing the right setting, non-confrontational setting. They're both standing up. What they should be doing? Sitting down, right? In a non-confrontational place, right? They might be, being upset in a very high stress place, maybe at a workplace or the gym or something like this, going to a relaxing place. Not where there's lots of people and lots of shouting, etc. A more relaxing, a calmer place, maybe a masjid, to calm people down. So choosing the right setting. The third thing, unclear if he did this or not, active listening and empathy. Active listening and empathy. This is very important for both of the people involved. So by the way, this is both for people trying to facilitate bringing people together and those who are in the conflict themselves as well. This is so important, and this is a skill that a lot of people don't have. Active listening and empathy. Because when someone's talking, what's happening? They are thinking about the thing that they want to say. Right? If you engage in active listening, what are the cues of active listening? Obviously, not talking while the other person's talking. Your gaze and looking at the person when you're speaking to them. If someone's talking to you and you're like this or on your phone, that's not active listening. So looking at the person. One other skill of active listening that makes a person feel heard, and it's a very beautiful thing, is when they're speaking, you reflect back to them what they've said to you. So someone has said, so Sarim was saying, this guy thinks that he can just boss me around. So then saying like, so I hear like you're really frustrated that people are telling you what to do and people are bossing you around. So what does that do to Sa'im? It makes him feel heard. Makes him feel like there's someone that's actually listening. The second thing that was there that it did, not just reflect back, but also empathize. Identify the emotions that they might be feeling and actually articulate them for them. Like, it must be real frustrating that you try to just do something like just go behind to do something and someone comes breathing down your neck. But then you might trigger the other guy that's there. But if you're speaking to them, if he's just speaking to you and unloading, then that's something for you to think about. That's active listening and empathy. Number 4, reflect on personal responsibility. So thinking rather than what the other person did wrong, what did I do in this situation? Maybe I acted a bit out of turn. Maybe I did something. This is very important in all conflict scenarios. Everybody's always focused on the other person. One of the activities that people do for people who have difficulty with conflict resolution, particularly within marriages, they say both parties should go into separate places and they should write down the points of the other person. And then come. And then both present the case of the other person. To force yourself to put yourself in the other person's shoes, and that allows you to reflect on personal responsibility. And then the 5th one is to establish cooperation rather than competition by saying, look, let's figure out a way together, those are some key words, together, how we can resolve this, or let's think of a way that we can work together better, like in this scenario. Let's talk about this together, and using these types of words rather than just tit for tat in this way. And if you're a mediator, then actually trying to go and say, okay, let's work towards a solution where we don't feel like we're being micromanaged, but at the same time we ensure that there's order in what's happening, for instance.
First suggestion you gave was to resolve it as soon as you can. The next one was...
Yeah, as I said, they're very good. The next one was find the right setting. So when I say as soon as you can, that's not meaning like every time, immediately. It's within spectrum. What I mean is don't delay it till a very long time. Like a week, 2 or 3 weeks later we'll have some. No, because that's when these things foster up. But sometimes there may be utility if the emotions are high to having a bit of a cooling off period as well. Alrighty. Now the barriers, and we end with this, the barriers to bringing people together are ego and selfishness. 2 things. Kibr, arrogance, and selfishness. The arrogance to admit that you've done something wrong, and the selfishness because you only want to take from that relationship and you don't want to give anything in particular. And the Prophet ﷺ said, verily the best of men are slow to anger and quick to be appeased, or quick to rida, to just being content and okay with things. And the most evil of men are quick to anger and slow to be appeased and to basically calm down and be in a state of rida. And with that, we remind ourselves before we go into Ramadan that this is the period of time where we see anecdotally the shaitan tries to come and create problems within families, within friends, within people, so as to spoil their Ramadan afterwards, so that they're consumed with upsetness and malice, and there's gossiping and there's backbiting. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah has no need for a person who's fasting if they're not giving up these sorts of foul speeches. And so keep this in mind as we go forward, that Ramadan is the time to strengthen the ties of our family. And Ramadan is the time to reconcile, either if we are involved, but to also look to how we can reconcile between people, because that would be a better voluntary deed than, as the Prophet ﷺ said, than the qiyam and the fasting and the charity that happens in Ramadan itself, subhanAllah. And of course, when it comes to coming up to Ramadan as well, ensuring that the heart is clean and pure, so that we can attain the forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can accept from us. So I think that this was a very timely class right before Ramadan to prepare our hearts for this and to maintain our families together. That last section is there for your own benefit, for those who are going through pain, for those who are going through suffering, for those who have been in situations where they've been wronged very deeply, they've been oppressed, they've been hurt, they've been abused. That is just 11 points to reflect upon from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, to help move on and to help actually forgive inside of the heart. So we conclude with this, inshallah ta'ala.